What if the most terrifying thing in the world, sentient, a ghost or a monster, but something that looks natural, feels familiar, and never lets you leave? It started like any other adventure. 5 friends, fresh out of college, craving one last thrill before life caught up to them. They booked cheap flights, packed their bags, and headed off to a remote country, a place where the forests are untouched. The locals speak in riddles, and the trails aren't always on the map. You know how it goes. Hiking gear, loud music, selfies on mountain edges. It was supposed to be fun. But then they met a stranger. He wasn't threatening, just strange, quiet eyes, thick accent. He told them about a trail, one that doesn't appear on Google Maps. Old place, he said. Not for tourists. That should have been the first warning. But of course, they laughed it off. What's the worst that could happen, right? A cool story. Maybe some creepy ruins. It was just plants and rocks and trees. At least, that's what they thought. They followed the path, dirt, narrowing into something more like a game trail. The jungle around them started to grow thicker, colder, quieter. No birds. No birds. Just silence, like the forest was holding its breath. Then they saw it. Stone walls buried under centuries of growth. Cracked statues with worn faces and vines. Vines everywhere. Twisting, pulsing, watching. It wasn't long before one of them stepped on something that moved. And that was just the beginning. Because what they found in those ruins, or what found them, wasn't just ancient. It was alive, and it wanted them to stay. Sometimes, the worst mistake isn't ignoring the warning. It's thinking you're immune to the danger. The group had 5 members. Jason, the loud, adventurous one. He was always the first to say, "Let's do it." Lena, his girlfriend, practical but curious, always snapping pictures. Mark, quiet, skeptical, the one who read the guidebooks and packed the first aid kit. Sarah, the empath, sensitive to every shift in mood. And Chris, the wild card, funny, restless, easily bored. They had been backpacking for a week already, hiking through waterfalls, sleeping under the stars, sharing beers around small campfires. The country was beautiful, untouched, and they were having the time of their lives. But that changed when they stopped at a tiny village on the edge of the forest. They only meant to grab water and snacks. The villagers barely spoke English. Most looked at them with quiet suspicion, except one man. He approached them with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He pointed at their hiking gear, then at the jungle. "You want something real," he said. Jason laughed. Always. The man leaned in. Old place, hidden path, no tourists. Only locals know it. He sketched a crude map on a napkin and gave them one final word. Careful. That should have been enough. Mark wanted to say no. He did, actually. Said it felt off, too vague, too strange. But Chris jumped in, eager to shake things up. And Jason, he was already loading up the packs. An hour later, they were on their way. At first, the path felt normal. Dirt and stones. Birdsong in the air. They joked, argued, took videos. The map was barely helpful, but the trail seemed to exist. Just faintly, like something that wasn't meant to be followed. Then the forest started to change. The light dimmed, even though the sun was still up. The trees grew taller, too close together. The sounds vanished. No rustling leaves, no buzzing insects. Just ... silence. Sarah stopped walking. "Do you feel that?" she whispered. "What?" asked Lena. "It's like we're being watched." Jason chuckled, but it didn't sound convincing. Still, they kept going, because that's what people do in stories like this. They keep going until it's too late to turn back. Fear doesn't always scream at you. Sometimes it whispers from just beyond the trees. The trail was barely a trail now. Vines dragged across their legs like fingertips. Every now and then, someone would stop and listen, but there was nothing. Not even wind. Lena finally broke the silence. "Why is it so quiet?" Jason shrugged. "Maybe the wildlife avoids this place." Mark muttered, "Yeah, maybe for a reason." The deeper they went, the stranger things became. Moss covered everything, but not like normal moss. It was too thick, too red. The plants grew in twisted, unnatural shapes. Some leaves had patterns that looked like eyes. Others looked like mouths. Chris rushed over, laughing, until he saw what she landed on. It wasn't a rock. It was a skeleton. Not animal, human, dressed in torn clothes, half buried beneath the moss. No one spoke for a long moment. Mark scanned the forest. "We should go back." But Jason shook his head. "We're already here. We're close." Lena whispered, "Close to what?" It pressed on. They reached a narrow ridge where the path dipped downward into a bowl-shaped valley. From above, they saw it, a stone structure, almost completely buried in green. It looked like a small temple, wrapped in vines so thick it was hard to tell where the jungle ended and the ruin began. But more disturbing than the sight was the sound. It started faint, like someone whispering their names, barely audible but unmistakable. Jason, Lena, Sarah spun around. "Who said that?" "No one," said Chris, trying to laugh. "It's just in your head." But it wasn't, because the voices kept coming, always just behind them. And the deeper they walked, the more the jungle seemed to listen. Jason tried to lighten the mood. Okay, this is getting creepy. But we came for a story. Right, here it is. Then Chris screamed. Everyone turned. He was clawing at his leg, shouting, "Get it off me!" They rushed over. A vine had wrapped around his ankle. It didn't look like it had grown there. It looked like it had moved. Mark sliced it with his knife. The vine bled, dark, thick sap dripping like blood. They stared at it. That's when they realized, ... They weren't finding the ruin. It was leading them to it. It's not the ruins that trapped you. It's what waits inside them. Something that doesn't want you to leave. They arrived at the ruins just before sundown. The temple rose from the earth like a wound, half swallowed by roots and vines. Its stones were blackened, ancient, carved with symbols no one could understand. The structure wasn't too large, maybe 2 stories, but it radiated a weight that made the air feel heavy. Lena took a picture. The screen on her phone flickered, then died. She tried to power it back on. Nothing. Dead battery. Mark asked. I charged it this morning. We came this far, he said. Might as well look inside. Inside, it was colder, silent. The walls were lined with carvings, human shapes with no faces, surrounded by twisted roots. In the center of the floor was a pit, maybe 3 feet wide, with more vines hanging down into the darkness. Sarah peered in. It's deep. I can't see the bottom. Mark leaned over her shoulder. Let's not. A noise cut him off. A click, followed by a snap, then silence. They turned. Chris was gone. Just gone. His backpack lay at the entrance. His footsteps stopped halfway into the room. They ran outside. No sign of him. They called his name over and over. Nothing. Then Lena pointed. Look. On the stone wall, a trail of dark red led to a thin crack between 2 stone slabs, as if something had dragged him inside. Jason moved toward it. Mark grabbed his arm. We need to go. But Jason pulled away. He's our friend, they argued, voices rising in panic, until something cut through the noise. Laughter, but not Chris's. It sounded like Chris, but it wasn't him. It was off, too slow, too hollow. It echoed from the trees, from the ruins, from everywhere. And then the vines moved. Not all at once, just slightly, like something stretching after a long sleep. Mark took a step back and felt something brush his leg. He looked down. A vine curled around his ankle. He screamed and kicked, but it held firm, like muscle instead of plant. Jason ran over, slashing with his pocket knife. The vine snapped, releasing Mark, but it bled again, dark thick sap. It smelled like rot and iron. They backed away from the temple. The vines followed. They weren't growing. They were hunting. Back at their camp, just a few feet from the ruinous edge, they found it ransacked. Bags torn, food missing, gear scattered. Sarah whispered, "We're not supposed to be here." And that's when they heard the whispering again. But this time, it wasn't their names. It was their thoughts. Jason heard his father, who died 2 years ago, saying, "I forgive you." Lena heard her dog barking, the one that died when she was 12. Sarah heard her mother singing lullabies. Each voice pulled them in different directions. Only Mark resisted. "It's not real," he shouted. "None of this is real." But Jason turned and walked toward the trees, toward the voice. The others screamed after him, but he didn't turn around. The vines opened a path for him, welcoming, loving, and then closed behind him. He never screamed, just vanished. Sometimes the scariest part isn't what's chasing you. It's what's crawling into your mind. After Jason disappeared, everything cracked. Mark, Lena, and Sarah sat in a tight circle, backs against one another, watching the trees, the vines, the ruins. No one spoke for hours. When night fell, the jungle seemed to come alive, not with sound, but with movement, vines curling just out of sight, shadows shifting with no source. The temperature dropped, only now it didn't stop. Lena began mumbling to herself, rocking slightly. Mark tried to hold her, but she jerked away, screaming, "You're not him. Stop pretending." Sarah cried quietly. "I saw Jason," she said. "He was standing by the ruin. He told me to come with him. He said he was cold." Mark shook his head. "That's not Jason. That's this place messing with you." But Sarah wouldn't listen. She stood up and walked toward the temple. Mark ran after her, but she was fast. Too fast for someone who hadn't eaten in a day. She stepped into the ruins, paused at the stone pit, and looked down. "Mom," she whispered, and then she jumped. Mark screamed her name and ran to the edge. The pit was empty. No sound, no body, only vines writhing deeper below. He turned to find Lena. She was gone. Only her jacket remained, torn and covered in sap. The forest was laughing, not loudly, but just enough, like it was enjoying the game. Mark tried to run. He made it 20 steps before something shot out of the ground. A root, a vine, a limb, and speared through his calf. He collapsed, screaming, and dragged himself backward. The vine twisted like a snake, rearing up to strike again. He pulled out his knife and hacked wildly, screaming in rage and terror. Eventually, it let go. He crawled for hours, blood trailing behind him. His mind spiraled. Voices echoed that didn't belong. He saw his childhood bedroom, his mother's face, his dead dog, a city skyline that shimmered and vanished like heat haze. The vines weren't just killing them, they were studying them, mimicking memories, feeding on emotion, turning grief into bait. At some point, Mark passed out. When he woke, the jungle was still. No wind, no sounds, but the ruin was closer. He hadn't moved. It had. The vines had pulled him back. His leg was rotting. He had no food, no hope, but he had his phone and a little bit of battery left. So he hit record. What if the last thing you ever see is something no one will ever believe? The video was short, just under 3 minutes. It was found 6 months later, recovered by a rescue team that wasn't even looking for them, just passing through on a completely unrelated search. The phone was buried under moss in a half-collapsed tent at the edge of the ruins, still warm, as if someone had just placed it there. But there was no one left. The footage begins shaky. Mark is pale, bleeding, barely able to speak. If anyone finds this, he says, voice trembling, don't go near the ruins. He winces in pain. The camera slips, showing vines slithering across the ground just feet away. It's alive, he whispers. The whole place, it mimics voices, faces, thoughts. He tries to lift the phone again, his hand trembling. It feeds on people, on pain. It learns you. Then it becomes you. Behind him, the vines move. I don't think it wants to kill us. Not right away. Suddenly, his head jerks. He stares off screen, eyes wide. Then the screen cuts to black, but the audio keeps recording. A voice, soft, distant, echoing like a child calling out in the woods, says, Mark, where did you go? His mother's voice. The recording ends. No bodies were found. No bones, no blood, only vines. The footage went viral after it leaked online. Some say it was a marketing stunt. Others swear it's real, especially locals who never go near that part of the forest. The path still exists, but only sometimes. And only for the ones who aren't looking for it.